Landon DuPont is the big name in terms of leaving the CHL for the NCAA in his pre-draft season. And similar to Gavin McKenna in year one, NIL money seems to be at the center of another potential first overall pick heading down this new path. And in this video, I've decided to take a look specifically at the Everett Silvertips as a CHL case study in the new world of NCAA eligibility. The 7 top scorers from the regular season are moving on, and 5 of those, including Matthias Van Hanen and Landon DuPont, are heading to the NCAA. But we're going to end this video on a positive note. The NCAA path has done some damage for sure, and the CHL will never be the same. But there are players who are getting a huge second chance because of this new opportunity. So let's take a look at it.
Numbers that I'm starting to hear from like valid sources, like I think they're out to lunch a little bit, to be honest with you, but like we're talking in the 7 figures, like that's the kind of thing that's being buzzed around out there. And I know that like right after Gav signed last year, and like I poked around and could never get a definitive answer on actually how much NIL he was getting, but it just kind of became like accepted that he made 750. And like with some people saying like with bonuses, it was like well over $1 million. Just recently, just this last week, I was talking and like I got pushed back hard on that. Hard that they're like, he did not make that much money this year. That it's like these top players that are just a class below McKenna on the recruitment, you know, they're making 180, you know, maybe they're making 200, like the 180, like Roger McQueen, the Porter Martones, like that's the world that they're living in.
Welcome to the 4th video in my series that I call Frozen Assets. And for me, I believe this is going to be my final entry here. I wanted to document all of the changes that the hockey development world has undergone in just 1 year after the NCAA began allowing CHL players to enroll. In the previous videos, I outlined the history of how college athletes gained the ability to be paid and how specifically it's affected the CHL. So today I'm going to take a look into the future with what we've seen in the past year since the doors have been opened. I believe the CHL and the USHL are going to be forced to make major changes due to the massive fallout from player movement. But like I said in the beginning, I want to end this on a positive note. The change with the NCAA path has what I consider to be a massive bright spot. As I continue to talk about the NCAA impact on the CHL, I've been challenged on some of the numbers, like how many players can get NIL or even scholarships. And I talked about that money in a previous video. And basically, every single NCAA player now qualifies for some sort of payment. And every player on an NCAA Division I roster can get a scholarship. So according to importsports.ca, 297 Division I NCAA commitments came out of the CHL this past year, the very first year it was available. The website goes on to say that that was roughly 38% of the new commitments for the NCAA. And that's over 1/3 of the new commitments in just 1 year coming from the CHL at this point. So put that in perspective. That's more than 11 teams, 11.423, worth of players leaving the CHL for the NCAA in the first year, or just under 19% of the league if you base the team size for the CHL on a 26-man roster. 26 is a bit of a generalized number because of how much transition there is on some of these CHL rosters. For example, there were 34 players listed on Everett's regular season stat sheets last year, and some only playing 1 game. So I base this number first, that's the maximum players for an NCAA team, but second, if you look at a hockey team with 19 skaters in a game, plus reserves with healthy scratches, etc., I think that 26 player number is one that functions for all intents and purposes. From all of this, another question was brought to the forefront of this debate. How much impact can all this have? Because really, how many roster spots are there available for Canadian pro junior players who want to go to the NCAA? To sum it up, there are currently 61 teams in the CHL, 23 in the WHL, 20 in the OHL, and 18 in the Q. And there are 63 Division I NCAA schools with hockey programs. So hypothetically, you could populate the entire NCAA with CHL players and still have 2 teams left over. If you want to double check those numbers, you can head to the CHL website, and I found the list of all the NCAA Division I teams here as well. And so I'll sum all this up. There is technically room for the entire CHL in the NCAA, and every one of those players is eligible for a scholarship as well as NIL money. But obviously that's not practical. So at this point, we saw roughly 19% of the CHL move on to the NCAA in the past year. But you could very realistically see that number doubling, where the equivalent of 40% of the CHL turns over to a route that 1 year ago didn't exist. Agents are advising their players to head that route, and the NCAA is actively recruiting players at younger ages. Landon DuPont, for instance, he's going to be heading to college as a 17-year-old. But all of these numbers are in flux even this year, and they're going to continue to shift as players are adjusting their paths forward even at this point in the summer. The NCAA is likely still contacting players to see if they can add anyone to the rosters before the fall. So now that we've talked about the scope of transfers, I want to look at the case study of one team and the NCAA's impact this summer. And of course, I'm talking about the Everett Silvertips. The Silvertips dominated the WHL last season, thanks in part to a solid core of veterans that were committed to the team. Carter Bear, Julius Miettinen, Terrence Smith, and Shea Bush were all top 10 in points production for the team, and all were drafted by NHL teams and opted to return and try to help lead this team to a championship. The team's leading points producer, Matthias Van Hanen, was drafted this year by the New Jersey Devils in the second round. And standout young defenseman Landon DuPont, who some think could go first overall in next year's draft, he turned heads, generating the 4th highest point total for the team at just 16 years old. He just turned 17 on May 28th, and now he's heading to the University of Michigan. From Michigan Daily, it says this: DuPont truly fits the description of a generational prospect. He only turned 17 in May, but he's the front runner for the first overall pick in the NHL Draft next season for a reason. DuPont is one of just 9 players in history to receive the exceptional status designation from the CHL, which allowed him to enter the league a year early at age 15, and he's more than lived up to that status. DuPont is a play-driving defenseman who has excellent defensive skill, a strong shot, and a high hockey IQ. He's dominant in every aspect of the game. To be fair, for the Silvertips, transition was inevitable, with multiple players at or around 20 years of age. We're seeing the top 7-point producers all move on after this year. Carter Bear, leading goal scorer in the regular season, along with Julius Miettinen, 3rd in points, are advancing their pro career. Both look slated to play in the AHL next season, although I believe Bear will have an opportunity to crack Detroit's roster if he has a strong preseason and camp. But 5 of the leading point producers are heading to the NCAA in just the 2nd season where that is an option for them. So we saw NIL money play a part in Gavin McKenna leaving the CHL in his pre-draft season as he headed for Penn State. According to Flow Sports, they're hearing estimates for Landon DuPont that are nearing 7-figure territory. But they don't have to release that information. The fact that McKenna allowed that information to be released was impressive, and I think it sets some sort of precedent. But we may never hear the exact number that DuPont got from the University of Michigan. But back to Everett. I was able to find 6 players in total leaving the team for the NCAA, but 3 of those players are 20, and to be fair, they may be running out of CHL options. So Terrence Smith, team captain, 5th on the team in scoring, he's heading out, and again, he's 20, so he may need to move on anyway. Zachary Shantz, 6th on the team in scoring, heading to St. Cloud State University, another 20-year-old player. Jesse Heslop, 7th in scoring, also 20, University of Connecticut. But it was interesting to see the other players who could have returned to the team and decided not to. So Matthias Van Hanen, He was the points leader, and of course, he took off in the postseason. Drafted by New Jersey, he had been slated to push the NCAA off for 1 year, but he decided to head to Boston College early. Then, of course, Landon DuPont, fourth on the team in scoring, and some think he could be the first overall pick. He's leaving the Silvertips for the University of Michigan. Shea Bush, 19. He's heading to Penn State. He had 18 points in just 12 games in the regular season. So heading back to Van Hanen for a minute, what makes him such an interesting case in all of this is that the transfer agreement for the CHL was updated in this year's CBA implementation. Each NHL team can assign one 19-year-old to the AHL going forward. So Van Hanen qualified for this. Remember, this was his second draft year. He would have qualified for this new rule. So if New Jersey had wanted, they could have assigned him to the AHL, but he opted for the NCAA instead. But it was Landon DuPont's decision to leave the CHL that really stuck out to me. DuPont is heading in his draft year. Like McKenna, he's highly ranked, but at just 17, he's making the move to the University of Michigan, and he'll be playing alongside the Red Wings first-round pick, J.P. Hurlburt, for the Wolverines. And so the opportunity is there that for the second straight year, a player that left the CHL for the NCAA could be drafted first overall. And that's been my point about the shift in the CHL. It's more than just losing your players, you're losing some of your top players. The NCAA recruited McKenna at 17 for a specific reason. They had a massive outdoor game where they needed to sell more than 70,000 tickets. They believed that by paying him $700,000, they could make that event a smashing success. That's legitimate star power that brings money into a program. And so in the reverse argument, a league is only as healthy as its stars. So if the CHL for a second straight year loses the first overall pick to the NCAA, that's all the sponsorship attention and money, all those jersey sales that are removed from the league and legitimate income that the leagues definitely need. The CHL doesn't release their financial numbers, but teams constantly talk about what a struggle it is to maintain operations, especially in the sport of hockey. So it's been just 1 year and the path to the CHL has become incredibly transactional. But it's not all players heading out the door either. The USHL is losing top talent to the CHL, potentially most notably Carter Meyer. He went to the Q from the US Development. You remember that J.P. Hurlburt made a similar move. He went to the WHL from the USNDTP. Meyer is one of several players who terminated their contracts with the USHL, and he could use this season to boost his draft status. J.P. Hurlburt saw a significant impact in goals because he went to the WHL. It's a league where you can score more, and for some of these players, that's going to be a significant pop for scouting as they head into their pre-draft year. But there's another case here, specifically on Everett, and I want to be fair and mention this. Ryan Gould. This is someone who actually started in the NCAA last year, but he left to return to the CHL. He played in just 6 games with Michigan Tech before heading to Everett, and he scored just 1 goal and was a -2. In the regular season after returning to Everett, he had 50 points in 53 games, and in the postseason, 10 points in 18 games. So this is what I've talked about. The goal scoring differential of the NCAA to the CHL or the USNDTP to the CHL. Players are now recognizing, coming from the US, that they can pad their stats. And for Ryan Gould, his stats were not looking good in the NCAA. 1 goal in just 6 games, and he turns into a point-per-game player by heading back to the WHL. So what's my point in all this? The CHL is going to become incredibly transactional. You're going to have top talent from the US NDTP head there for 1 season to bolster those numbers, like what we saw with J.P. Hurlburt and what I believe we're going to see with Carter Meyer. And then after they're drafted, they'll move on to the NCAA. That kind of churn system is difficult for program stability. But on the other side of this, when it comes to the top talent in the CHL that goes in there at 16, the NCAA is recruiting at that age. So you could have some of these young players playing just 1 or 2 years at 16 or 17, then recruited in their pre-draft year. Now there's got to be some confidence there. They have to know that their stats are going to be impacted by making that move. But the money is just too good for these top players. And at this point, as long as they're confident it's not going to negatively impact their draft status, there's no reason not to go after that, where you've got a full ride scholarship to the university plus more money than you could ever make in Pro Junior. So I believe it's all transactional. And at the end of the day, I think the US NDTP and the USHL is ultimately taking a bigger hit because you're losing talent to the CHL in the pre-draft year. And in the CHL, you're still going to retain talent in the pre-draft year. But as soon as someone's drafted, they're very likely out the door to the NCAA with what we saw with Matthias Van Hanen. But at the beginning of this, I promised to end this on a positive note. So a couple of years ago, I got to interview Alex Cotton, Red Wings draft pick. And this was in 2024, right while this case was going, and most people were convinced that the NCAA was going to start allowing CHL players. So before the interview, I asked Alex Cotton what he thought of it. And he kind of had a somber look for a moment and said he would have liked that option. Cotton represents the player that I think is going to get new life from this transfer agreement. You get drafted, and then after you're 20, you have to leave the CHL. Well, if you're not able to get into the ECHL or the AHL and take that next step forward, the team still controls your rights for a couple years. And in Cotton's case, he was advised by the Red Wings to head overseas. So at just 20, he heads overseas, and he ended up moving around all over Europe at this point. But now those players who are aging out of the CHL have an opportunity to play in the NCAA. And there's been another rule change that's really going to benefit them. The NCAA has just approved a 5th year for athletes, and it's based on either your 19th birthday or your high school graduation. So someone can now be a collegiate athlete up until age 24 at this point. So if you're 20 and your post-draft hasn't worked out, you're not getting a spot in the ECHL or the AHL, and the team says you have to go to Europe, now you can go to the NCAA and have up to 4 years of eligibility to play. That's enough time to get a degree. And that's the point of why I think this is such a bright spot. Even after you're drafted, it's such a difficult road to get to the NHL. And now those players, instead of having to leave North America, they have a chance to go to the NCAA and actually grab an education because hockey may not work out for them. So this new route is giving them an option they didn't have when Alex Cotton had to make his decision to head to Europe. And that was based on the advice of the team. Now, not only can they stay in North America, if they buckle down, they can get on a path that gives them options after hockey life, and that's getting a degree. So I do want to end on that note because I think it's a massive positive. And if I'm a young hockey player, I love that I can now go that route if things just don't happen after you get drafted. So if you've tuned in for this series, I want to thank you. This is something I was passionate about because I think we've seen a major change to the developmental path that both the CHL and the USHL are going to have major changes because of. Neither league will be the same. There are even suggestions floating around that they try some sort of merger for the benefit of both leagues. I think that would be incredibly difficult. But going forward, it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. Of course, the players are benefiting greatly. They've got a lot more options than they used to have. And instead of having to go overseas for the hope of a shot one day, they can opt for an education instead and still play high-level hockey. And now there are more and more NHL scouts looking at free agents that come out of the NCAA as well. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe. This was frozen assets, the NCAA path, NIL, and the impact on hockey development.